At dawn, the maid found Sir Reginald Haverford face down in the frozen fountain, a single red rose clenched in his gloved hand. No footprints marred the virgin crust, only the victim's own, leading to the ice, and none returning. The guests, trapped by the blizzard, gathered in the oak-panelled hall, breath fogging the air. Hercule Poirot, summoned by a frantic telegram, stepped from the sleigh, moustache bristling. "Mon Dieu," he murmured, grey cells already whirring. "A murder most impossible and most intimate." Chapter 1. The Body in the Ice. At 7:30 on the morning of the 23rd of December, 1934, the maid, Elsie Piggott, opened the servants' door to fetch kindling and saw the fountain. It stood in the centre of the south lawn, a baroque confection of marble nymphs and dolphins that Sir Reginald had imported from Florence in better days. Overnight, the blizzard had transformed it into a solid block of ice, opaque as frosted glass. And in the heart of that block, face down, arms flung wide as though embracing the cold, lay Sir Reginald Haverford himself. Elsie's scream was thin, quickly devoured by the snow. She dropped the coal scuttle and ran, apron flapping, back through the scullery, through the green baize door, into the main hall where the guests were already gathering for breakfast. "Sir Reginald! He's in the fountain, dead!" The words ricocheted off oak panelling and ancestral portraits. A teacup slipped from Lady Beatrice Haverford's fingers and shattered on the parquet. Dr. Felix Lang rose so quickly his chair toppled. Miss Daphne Vale pressed a hand to her mouth, eyes wide above the collar of her dove-grey morning dress. Mr. Giles Thorne merely raised an eyebrow, as though someone had announced the toast was burnt. Mrs. Agnes Crowe, housekeeper these 30 years, was the first to recover. She seized Elsie by the shoulders. "Show me!" They went out together. Mrs. Crowe, Elsie, Dr. Lang, and finally Lady Beatrice, wrapped in sable against the cold that had already claimed her husband. The snow was knee-deep. Their boots carved a ragged path across the lawn. When they reached the fountain, the wind had dropped to a whisper, and the scene was almost serene. Sir Reginald wore his dinner jacket, the white tie still impeccably knotted. His top hat had rolled a few feet away and lay brim up, filling with snow like a black bird's nest. A single red rose, impossible, obscene in its freshness, was clenched between his gloved fingers. The ice had preserved him perfectly. The rime on his moustache, the faint blue of his lips, the way his eyes stared sightlessly at the sky. Dr. Lang knelt, breath clouding. "He's been dead some hours. Rigour is advanced." He touched the corpse's cheek, then the ice. "No fracture beneath the body. The fountain froze solid before he was placed here." Lady Beatrice gave a small animal sound. "Placed? You mean someone carried him?" Lang finished. He stood brushing snow from his trousers. "Look at the coat-tails. They're under the ice. He was laid atop it after the surface hardened." Mrs. Crowe's face was the colour of parchment. "But the footprints? There's only his own, leading to the fountain. None coming back." They all saw it then. A single set of prints, Sir Reginald's unmistakable galoshes with the worn left heel, marched in a straight line from the terrace doors to the fountain's edge. There they stopped. The snow beyond was virgin, untouched by man or beast. "Impossible," whispered Daphne Vale. "Precisely," said a voice behind them, crisp as the frost itself. They turned. A small man in a fur-collared overcoat stood at the edge of the lawn, leaning on a Malacca cane. His moustache was magnificent, his eyes green and very bright. Snowflakes melted on the dome of his bowler hat. "Hercule Poirot," he announced, bowing slightly. "At your service, I received a telegram most urgent from Sir Reginald himself, though I confess I am too late to prevent tragedy." Lady Beatrice stared. You were expected?" "Alas, no. The telegram arrived yesterday, but the trains were delayed. I have come by sleigh from Keswick." He gestured to the track his runners had carved through the drifts. "The roads are impassable. We are, I believe, quite cut off." Dr. Lang's voice was sharp. "Then you're stranded here with the rest of us." Poirot's smile was wintry. "Précisément, and with a murderer." He approached the fountain, moving with the neat precision of a man who disliked disorder in any form. The others parted instinctively. Poirot circled the ice, head tilted, then crouched to examine the footprints. "Size 10, I think. The left heel, yes, a nail missing. Sir Reginald's own boots, beyond doubt. But observe the depth. He walked here unaided, yet the return journey had vanished." He straightened. "Tell me, madame," he addressed Lady Beatrice, "did your husband suffer from somnambulism?" She blinked. "Sleepwalking? No, never. And yet these prints suggest he walked in his sleep to his death. Curious." Poirot's gaze swept the group. "Who discovered the body?" Elsie curtsied, trembling. "Me, sir. I came for the kindling. At what hour?" 7:25, near enough. The kitchen clock had just struck the quarter. Poirot nodded. "And the terrace doors, were they locked?" Mrs. Crowe answered. "Always, sir. Sir Reginald was most particular. The key hangs inside the study, on a brass hook." "Yet the prints begin at the doors," Poirot murmured. "Someone unlocked them, or Sir Reginald had the key upon his person. We shall see." He turned to the fountain again. The red rose fascinated him. He drew a pocket-knife and chipped carefully at the ice around the stem until he could lift the flower free. It was perfect, dewed with frost. Its scent faint but unmistakable. "Rosa centifolia," he said softly. "The cabbage rose, not native to these gardens in December. It comes from a hothouse." He sniffed delicately. "And recently cut. The stem is still moist." Dr. Lang frowned. "There's a conservatory attached to the east wing. Sir Reginald was proud of his orchids." "Indeed. Then we must visit this conservatory. But first," Poirot gestured to the footprints. "Inspector Japp will wish to preserve these, a tarpaulin perhaps, until the police arrive." Mrs. Crowe gave a short, humourless laugh. "Police? The nearest constable is in Ambleside, and the passes are blocked till spring, like as not." Poirot's eyes gleamed. "Then justice must content itself with Hercule Poirot." He led the way back to the house, the others trailing like children after a stern master. In the hall, the fire had burned low. The air smelled of bacon and fear. A grandfather clock ticked solemnly in the corner. Poirot paused beneath it, noting the time, 8:15. "Madame," he said to Lady Beatrice, "you will forgive the intrusion, but I must ask, when did you last see your husband alive?" She sank into a chair, sable slipping from her shoulders. "At dinner. We dined early, 7 o'clock. Reginald was preoccupied. He quarrelled with Mr. Thorne over some business matter. Then he went to his study. Said he had letters to write. And after dinner. The gentleman took brandy in the library. I retired at 10. I assumed Reginald would follow." Poirot's gaze flicked to Giles Thorne, who lounged against the mantel, lighting a cigarette with studied nonchalance. "And you, monsieur, you remained with Sir Reginald?" Thorne exhaled smoke. "Until 11, perhaps. He was in a foul temper, muttering about ingratitude and family obligations. I left him alive and snarling." Daphne Vale spoke for the first time, her voice low. "I passed the study at 11:30. The light was still on. I heard voices. Voices!" Poirot pounced. "Whose?" "Sir Reginald's and a woman's. I couldn't make out words. I thought it was Lady Beatrice." Beatrice shook her head violently. "I was in my room. I took a sleeping draught at 10. Dr. Lang cleared his throat. "I can vouch for that. I prepared the draught myself." Poirot's moustache twitched. "Most convenient. And you, Doctor, where were you at 11:30? "In my room, reading. Alone? Quite alone." Mrs. Crowe bustled in with a tray of coffee, her face set like granite. "If you're done interrogating the quality, sir, there's breakfast going cold." Poirot accepted a cup with a bow. "Merci, madame, but one more thing. The conservatory key, where is it kept?" "On Sir Reginald's chain," Mrs. Crowe said promptly, "with the study key and the wine cellar. He was never without them." Poirot's eyes narrowed. "Then let us examine the body more closely." They returned to the fountain under a sky the colour of tarnished pewter. Dr. Lang and Giles Thorne helped lift Sir Reginald from his icy bier. The corpse was stiff, heavy with frost. Poirot searched the pockets with delicate precision. Wallet, cigar case, gold watch, stopped at 11:42. No keys. "Curious," Poirot said. "The keys are missing. Yet the study was locked this morning. Mrs. Crowe confirms it. Someone removed them after death." He straightened, brushing snow from his gloves. "Now, the conservatory." The east wing was a world apart from the rest of the house. Heated pipes clanked softly. The air was humid, fragrant with earth and blooms. Orchids drooped like purple ghosts from baskets. Ferns unfurled in the gloom. At the far end, a trellis of roses climbed a brick wall, dozens of buds, tight and perfect. Poirot inhaled deeply. "Magnifique! But observe, the door was bolted from within when Mrs. Crowe checked at midnight. Yet someone entered after that to cut the rose." He examined the bolt. A faint scratch marred the brass. "Forced? No, merely slipped with a knife. An inside job, then." Daphne Vale had gone pale. I sometimes help Mrs. Crowe with the watering. I have a key." Poirot whirled. "You, mademoiselle." "Sir Reginald gave it to me last month. For the orchids, he said," her voice cracked. "He said they reminded him of my mother." Lady Beatrice's eyes flashed. "Your mother was a typist girl. Don't presume." Poirot raised a hand. "Patience, madame. The rose is a clue, not a coronation. Tell me, mademoiselle, did you visit the conservatory last night?" "No, I was in my room. Yet your shoes—" Poirot pointed to Daphne's feet. The toes of her indoor slippers were damp, flecked with soil. "You have been among the flowers recently." Daphne looked down, stricken. I couldn't sleep. I came down at dawn, before Elsie found him." "Before?" Poirot's voice was silk over steel. "Then you saw the body first?" "No, the fountain was empty when I passed. I swear it." Dr. Lang stepped forward. "This is absurd. The girl's distraught." Poirot ignored him. He had found something beneath the rose trellis, a single petal, bruised and dark with blood. He lifted it carefully. "Human blood," he said quietly. "Type unknown, but fresh. Someone cut themselves on these thorns." Mrs. Crowe's hand flew to her cheek, where a thin scratch marred the skin. "An accident," she said quickly. "Pruning yesterday." Poirot's smile was gentle. "Of course, but the rose in Sir Reginald's hand was thornless. Someone removed them with care." He pocketed the petal. "Now, the study." The study was a fortress of mahogany and leather, the air thick with cigar smoke and secrets. The desk was untouched. Blotter, silver inkstand, a half-written letter in Sir Reginald's spiky hand. Poirot read aloud, "My dear Beatrice, by the time you read this, I shall be beyond the reach of your greed and your lies. The girl is not—" The sentence broke off. A blot of ink had soaked through the page. Intriguing, Poirot murmured. He was interrupted, and the key. He tried the door from within. Locked. Mrs. Crowe unlocked it this morning with her passkey, yet Sir Reginald's own key is missing. On the hearth, the fire had burned to embers. Poirot stirred them with the poker. Something glinted. A brass key, half melted, its wards fused. Destroyed, he said, but not the others, the conservatory key perhaps. Giles Thorne laughed. You think someone melted a key to confuse us? This is melodrama, not murder. Poirot's eyes were very green. Melodrama is the cloak murder wears when it wishes to be noticed, but let us see what else the fire conceals. He raked carefully. Beneath the ashes lay a scrap of paper, charred but legible. Meet me at the fountain midnight. Come alone. D. Daphne Vale swayed. Dr. Lang caught her elbow. I never wrote that, she cried. Poirot held the note to the light. The handwriting is yours, mademoiselle, but the ink, fresh, written in haste, perhaps with a fountain pen that leaked. He indicated a stain on the blotter. Sir Reginald sat here, read this note, and went to his death. But why the fountain? And why no return prints? He moved to the window. The terrace lay below, the fateful footprints clear as a diagram. But something else caught his eye. A faint groove in the snow, parallel to the prints, as though something had been dragged. Mon Dieu, he whispered, not dragged, carried. On a sled, perhaps. But the groove ends at the terrace steps. Then the footprints begin. He turned to the room. Someone planned this with care. The blizzard provided the stage, the fountain the tableau, but the rose, that is the signature. Lady Beatrice's voice was a thread. Reginald always carried a pressed rose in his wallet, from our wedding day. He said it reminded him of what he'd lost. Poirot opened the wallet again. Empty. Then the killer took it, he said. Or Sir Reginald gave it willingly. We must discover which. Outside, the wind rose again, rattling the casements. The clock in the hall struck 9. Somewhere in the house, a door slammed. Poirot closed the study door behind them. The inquest will be delayed, but the investigation begins now. No one leaves White Lodge. No one speaks to the servants alone. And the conservatory, he turned the key in the lock, remains sealed until I say otherwise. As they filed into the hall, Elsie the maid was waiting, eyes wide. In her trembling hand, she held a blood-stained envelope. It was under my door, sir, just now, addressed to Miss Daphne. Daphne took it with shaking fingers. Inside, a single sheet of her own stationery, the message scrawled in red ink that looked too much like blood. You should have stayed in the typing. Poor bastard. He's dead because of you. You're next. The paper slipped from her fingers and fluttered to the floor like a dying moth. Poirot picked it up, his face grim. The game, mes amis, has begun, and the snow keeps falling. Chapter 2. The Locked Conservatory. The envelope lay on the hall table like a bloodied calling card. Poirot slipped it into an inner pocket without comment, but his eyes, those disconcertingly bright green eyes, swept the circle of faces and found every one of them wanting. Lady Beatrice's knuckles were white on her sable muff. Dr. Lang's gaze flicked too often to the staircase. Giles Thorne lit a fresh cigarette from the stub of the last, the flame trembling between his cupped hands. Only Mrs. Crowe remained stone still, the scratch on her cheek livid against parchment skin. Breakfast, Poirot announced. We'll wait. We visit the conservatory, en suite. Mrs. Crowe produced her chatelaine with a jangle that sounded too loud in the hush. This way, sir. They processed along the east corridor, boots leaving wet prints on the turkey runner. The air grew warmer with every step. By the time they reached the glazed door, the temperature had climbed to shirt-sleeve heat. Humidity pressed against their faces like a damp flannel. Beyond the glass, green shadows shifted. Mrs. Crowe turned the handle. The door refused to yield. "Locked," she said flatly, "and bolted from within. I checked myself at midnight, after Sir Reginald retired." Poirot tried the handle himself, firm, unyielding, then pressed an eye to the keyhole. "The bolt is thrown, yet someone entered to cut the rose. Après minuit." He straightened. "Mademoiselle Vale, your key?" Daphne fumbled in her cardigan pocket and produced a small Yale key on a faded ribbon. He gave it to me for the orchids. Said they needed misting twice daily. Yet you did not mist them last night. I told you I couldn't sleep later." Poirot took the key, inserted it. The lock turned sweetly, but the door still held. He rapped the glass with his cane. "The bolt, madame. We require a ladder." Thorne snorted. "Or a ghost." Mrs. Crowe disappeared and returned with a library ladder. Dr. Lang and Thorne manoeuvred it against the door. Poirot climbed with surprising agility for a man who affected delicacy. At the top he peered over the transom. "Ah, the bolt is drawn, yes, but observe," he produced a penknife, slid the blade between door and frame, and flicked. The bolt shot back with a metallic snick. A thread, looped through the bolt and drawn from outside. Simple, ingenious. The door locks itself behind the intruder. He descended. The door now opened inward, on a breath of orchid-scented air. The conservatory was a jungle in miniature. Palms arched overhead. Staghorn ferns dripped from baskets. A central fountain, smaller twin to the one outside, trickled over mossy stones. The rose trellis ran, the length of the far wall, a riot of crimson against brick. The floor was flagstones scattered with petals and the faint prints of galoshes. Poirot knelt. Sir Reginald's tread, see the worn heel. He came here after the study, but not alone. A second set of prints, smaller, narrower, overlapped the first. A woman's shoe, size 4. Mademoiselle. Daphne shook her head violently. I wear 5s. Lady Beatrice? 6s, Beatrice said faintly, and I was in my room. Mrs. Crowe volunteered nothing. Poirot's gaze lingered on the scratch, then moved on. He followed the prints to the trellis. The soil beneath was disturbed. A pair of secateurs lay discarded, blades flecked with sap. One rose stem had been cut cleanly. Another hacked as though in haste. A single drop of blood, still tacky, darkened the flagstone. Someone hurried, Poirot murmured. The rose for the corpse was taken with care. The second in panic. Why two? Dr. Lang had wandered to a workbench cluttered with plant labels and fertilizer tins. He lifted a small glass vial, held it to the light. Aconitine, monk's hood extract, lethal in microdoses. His voice was clinical, but his hand shook. I keep it for experiments, cardiac patients, controlled dilution. This vial was full yesterday. Poirot took it. The label read Aconitum napellus, 1/1000. Half remained. Enough to fell an elephant, or a baronet. Thorne crushed his cigarette beneath his heel. You're saying the old man was poisoned here? I am saying the poison was obtained here. The method. Poirot's gaze fell on a copper watering can. He lifted it, sniffed. Cognac and something else. Bitter almonds. He dabbed a finger, tasted. Prussic acid. No, aconitine. Dissolved in brandy. A nightcap, perhaps. Lady Beatrice swayed. Reginald took brandy in the library after dinner. I poured it myself. From which decanter? The one in the study. He kept a special reserve. 1921 Armagnac. Poirot's eyes gleamed. Then we returned to the study, but first he moved along the trellis, counting blooms. 27 roses yesterday, Mrs. Crowe. 29. I counted when I locked up. 26 remain. 2 missing. 1 for the corpse. 1 for—" He stopped at a bare patch of soil. Something glinted. He scraped with the secateurs and unearthed a small gold object. A lady's cufflink, engraved with the initials BH. Beatrice gasped. "That's mine! From my riding habit. I lost it weeks ago." "Or planted it," Thorne said softly. Poirot pocketed the link. "We progress." They left the conservatory. Poirot locked the door and pocketed Daphne's key. In the corridor, the cold struck like a slap after the hothouse warmth. Mrs. Crowe led them to the study. The room felt smaller now, the air stale with dead smoke. The half-written letter still lay on the blotter. Poirot lifted the decanter, crystal, heavy, half full. He poured a thimbleful into a glass, sniffed, then touched it to his tongue. His eyebrows rose. Armagnac, yes, and aconitine, enough to kill in minutes. He stoppered the decanter. "Who refilled this after dinner?" Mrs. Crowe hesitated. "I did, sir. Sir Reginald rang at 9. Said he wanted a fresh bottle. From the cellar? Yes, I fetched it myself." Poirot opened the decanter again, tilted it to the light. A faint sediment swirled. "Then you brought poison, madame, or someone tampered en route." Her face strained. "I never— Of course not! But the cellar key was on Sir Reginald's chain, which is missing." He moved to the fireplace. The ashes had cooled. He raked them again. Beneath the charred scrap of note lay another fragment. "Fountain at midnight, or the world knows what you did in 27. The handwriting was Daphne's. Daphne stared at it, stricken. I wrote notes for Sir Reginald sometimes, dictation, but not this." Poirot folded both scraps together. "A forgery, perhaps. The paper is from your stationery, mademoiselle. The watermark matches the envelope under Elsie's door. Someone wishes to implicate you." Dr. Lang broke in. "This is madness. The man walked to the fountain and died. Exposure, alcohol, a weak heart. No." Poirot produced the rose from his pocket, still wrapped in his handkerchief. "This rose was cut at 12:07 a.m. The sap is still viscous. Sir Reginald was seen alive at 11:42 by the stopped watch. He received a note, drank poisoned brandy, walked to the fountain under his own power. Then what? Collapsed? Yet the footprints show no stagger. And the body was placed after the ice hardened at 3 a.m. Witness the frost patterns." He paced. "Timeline, but the footprints end at the fountain. Ergo, the return journey was above the snow." Thorne laughed. "On stilts?" "Or a ladder," Poirot said seriously. "Or skis. We shall search the outbuildings." A sudden thud overhead made them all start. Dust sifted from the ceiling. Mrs. Crowe's eyes widened. "The attic! No one's been up there since Michaelmas." Poirot was already moving. "Then we go now!" They climbed the narrow servant stair, flashlights cutting cones through the gloom. The attic smelled of cedar and mouse droppings. Trunks, broken chairs, a dressmaker's dummy wearing a moth-eaten ball gown. In the far corner, a skylight stood open. Snow had drifted across the boards. Poirot knelt. Fresh prints, galoshes again, led to the window. A coil of rope lay nearby, one end tied to a beam. Below, the conservatory roof glinted dully. "Access," Poirot said. "The killer entered here, descended to the conservatory, cut the rose, returned the same way. The skylight was left open. The wind erased roof prints." Dr. Lang's voice was hoarse. "But why?" "To fetch the second rose," Poirot said. "The one pressed into my hand last night with the warning." He reached into his pocket and drew out a second rose. Identical, thornless, the stem wrapped in black ribbon. None of them had seen him receive it. Thorne swore softly. "You've had that all along?" "Since 2 a.m., Poirot said, when a gloved hand pushed it under my door. The ribbon is from Lady Beatrice's dressing gown, silk, monogrammed. The thorns were removed with the secateurs we found. Someone wishes me to leave." Beatrice touched her throat. "My gown is in my room, untouched," Poirot finished. "The ribbon was cut from an old one stored in the attic. Sentiment or misdirection?" Footsteps sounded below. Rapid, urgent. Elsie burst onto the landing, face chalk white. "Sir, the fountain, it's cracked. There's water running and something red underneath." They thundered down the stairs and out into the snow. The fountain had indeed split. A jagged fissure ran from Sir Reginald's outstretched hand to the marble rim. Dark water seeped out, carrying with it a swirl of crimson. Poirot leaned over the edge. The ice was thinning rapidly. Beneath the surface, the red rose floated upward like a drowning star. And caught on the nymph's finger, a third rose, black with frost, its petals edged in dried blood. Poirot's voice cut through the wind. "The killer returns to the scene, and the snow keeps falling." Chapter 3. The Phantom Footprints. The fountain bled. A hairline crack had become a chasm. Water gushed over the marble lip in a dark ribbon, carrying flecks of crimson that dissolved into the snow. The third rose, black-petalled, frost-burned, bobbed against the nymph's stone hand like a macabre offering. Poirot leaned closer, breath fogging the air, and plucked it free with a handkerchief. The stem was brittle, snapped rather than cut, and the petals crumbled at his touch. "Frozen solid," he murmured. "This was placed before the ice formed, hours before the body." Dr. Lang stared, transfixed. "Then it's been there since the fountain first froze," Poirot finished. "Late evening, perhaps. The killer prepared the stage long before the curtain rose." Lady Beatrice turned away, retching into the snow. Daphne Vale stood rigid, gloved hands clenched at her sides. Giles Thorne lit another cigarette. The match flared, died, flared again. Mrs. Crowe alone seemed unmoved, but the scratch on her cheek had begun to weep a thin line of blood. Poirot straightened. "We searched the grounds. Maintenant. The return journey was made above the snow. Stilts, skis, a ladder, something. And the third rose tells us the conservatory was not the only stage." They fanned out across the south lawn, boots crunching through the crust. The snow was knee-deep in places, hip-deep in drifts against the yew hedges. The wind had sculpted it into fantastic shapes, waves, hollows, knife-edged ridges, but the single set of footprints from terrace to fountain remained, pristine, mocking. Inspector Japp arrived at that moment, red-nosed and furious, having battled through the pass on a farmer's sled. He took one look at the tableau and barked, "Nobody moves till I've seen the scene." Poirot greeted him with a bow. "Mon cher Japp, you're in time for the second act. Observe, the footprints end here. Yet the body was carried back to the house after 3 a.m. How?" Japp squinted. "Rope, sled? Both leave marks, yet the snow is virgin." Poirot gestured to the boathouse, a low stone building half buried at the lawn's edge. "We begin there." The boathouse door hung ajar. Snow drifted across the threshold. Inside smelled of tar and frozen lake water. Oars leaned in racks. A punt lay upended, its canvas cover stiff with ice. In the centre of the floor, a perfect circle of bare boards, swept clean. "Someone stood here," Poirot said, "long enough to melt the snow beneath their feet." He knelt, brushed away frost. Beneath, a scatter of white wax droplets, still soft. Candle grease, and look, he pointed to the rafters. A pair of extendable stilts, painted white to blend with snow, hung from pegs, the leather straps dangling like nooses. The footrests were carved to mimic galoshes, complete with a deliberate nick in the left heel. Jap whistled. Clever bastard! Walked above the snow, carried the body out, then retraced on stilts to erase the return prints. Précisément, Poirot said, but the stilts are shortened. See the saw marks? Adjusted for a smaller frame. A woman, perhaps, or a man of slight build. Daphne Vale had gone very still. I'm 5'2", she said faintly. Poirot's smile was gentle. Noted, mademoiselle, but let us measure. He lifted the stilts down. The footrests were size 4, Lady Beatrice's size. She stared at them as though they were serpents. Those were in the attic, Mrs. Crowe said suddenly. Sir Reginald used them for the village pageant. Played the stork in the Christmas play years ago. We stored them after. Convenient, Thorne drawled. Anyone could have fetched them. Poirot examined the straps. One bore a faint smear of blood. Dried brown. From the conservatory thorn, perhaps. And here, he scraped the wax with a thumbnail. Beneath, a flake of green paint, bright as a parrot's feather. From the boathouse door, the killer brushed against it. Jap was already searching. In a corner, half hidden by a pile of life-preservers, he found a bundle. A white bedsheet, stiff with frozen sweat and a coil of picture wire. Strangulation, he speculated. Poirot shook his head. No marks on the throat, but the sheet, monogrammed. R.H. Sir Reginald's own, from the linen cupboard. Mrs. Crowe's lips thinned. I aired the sheets yesterday, all accounted for. Then one was taken after airing, Poirot said, and returned soiled. We checked the laundry. They trudged back. To the house, the stilts carried like a trophy. In the scullery, the laundry basket yielded the mate to the blood-stained sheet, folded but with a single wax droplet on the hem. Poirot sniffed it. Beeswax. From the conservatory candles, Mrs. Crowe uses them to seal plant labels. The housekeeper's face was a mask. Anyone could have taken a candle. True, Poirot conceded, but the stilts required strength to carry a grown man. Dr. Lang, your medical opinion? Lang hesitated. Sir Reginald was slight, 11 stone perhaps. A fit person could manage. On stilts, in a blizzard? Poirot's tone was mild. We test this theory. He led them back to the lawn. Jap donned the stilts, wobbling like a drunk giraffe. After 3 steps he toppled, cursing, into a drift. Impossible, he spat snow in his moustache. Not without practice. Poirot nodded. Then our killer rehearsed. When? Thorne pointed to the yew hedge. There, broken branches. Someone practiced along the top, out of sight. They followed the hedge. The snow atop it was trampled in a narrow path, ending at a garden bench. Beneath the bench, a child's wooden sledge, its runners wrapped in rags to muffle sound. On the seat, a single red petal pressed flat. The third rose, Poirot said softly, placed in the fountain before the murder, then retrieved on the sledge with the body. But why? He lifted the petal. Beneath it a scrap of paper, folded small. He unfolded it carefully. The first rose was for love, the second for betrayal, the third for silence. The handwriting was Daphne's, undeniable. She stared at it, eyes huge. I didn't write that. I swear. Poirot tucked it away. We shall see, but the sledge explains the groove I saw from the study window. The body was dragged to the hedge, then carried on stilts to the fountain. The return journey erased the drag marks. Jap scratched his head, but the fountain was frozen solid by midnight. How'd they place the third rose before the body? Poirot's eyes gleamed. They didn't. The fountain froze around it. Someone chipped a hole, inserted the rose, let the water refreeze, a macabre time capsule. He led them to the fountain. The crack had widened. Water lapped at the marble. Poirot knelt, peered into the fissure. Something glinted at the bottom, a brass key half submerged. "The conservatory key," Mrs. Crow breathed. "It's back on the chain." Poirot fished it out with a stick. The chain was intact, the other keys missing. Returned after use, but why? Lang's voice was hoarse. "To make it look like suicide. Sir Reginald walks to the fountain, locks himself out of the conservatory, dies of exposure." "Yet the stilts contradict suicide," Poirot said. "And the poison—" He broke off. A low rumble echoed across the lawn. The boathouse roof, weighted with snow, groaned and slid. With a roar like thunder, the entire structure collapsed in a white avalanche. They ran. When the dust settled, the boathouse was a ruin. Japp swore. "Evidence gone." Poirot stood at the edge, eyes narrowed. "Or hidden. Observe. The collapse was triggered. See the rope?" A frayed cord dangled from the rafters, cut clean. "Someone planned this." Thorne laughed, a brittle sound. "Paranoia, Poirot. The snow was too heavy." Perhaps, but Poirot's gaze was on the yew hedge. A fresh set of prints, small, hurried, led from the ruin toward the kitchen garden. They ended at the coal chute, the iron lid ajar. Inside the chute, a single red rose, thornless, wrapped in black ribbon. A note pinned to the stem. "The game is not over, little detective. The 4th rose blooms at midnight." Poirot's face was grim. "The killer taunts us, and the snow keeps falling." Chapter 4. The Blackmail Ledger. The coal chute exhaled a breath of damp earth and cinders. Poirot crouched at the lip, the 4th rose pinched between gloved fingers. The ribbon was fresh silk, midnight blue this time, not black, and the note was written on heavy cream stock torn from the house's formal stationery. The ink was still wet. Japp sniffed. "Someone's taking the mickey. 4th rose, midnight. Sounds like a ruddy séance." "Or a countdown," Poirot said softly. "We have 7 hours until the next bloom. Come." They followed the chute's iron ladder into the cellar. The air was colder here, sharp with the bite of frozen stone. Barrels lined one wall, sacks of potatoes and onions another. A single bulb swung from a cord, casting long shadows that jittered like guilty men. The coal pile was undisturbed save for a shallow depression where a body had knelt. Poirot knelt too. In the black dust, the faint outline of a knee, a handprint and, delicately impressed, the toe of a woman's court shoe, size 4 again. A scatter of coal grains led to a door at the far end. Its padlock snapped open. "Wine cellar," Mrs. Crow supplied, arriving with a lantern. "Sir Reginald kept the best vintages under lock. Only he and I had keys." The door creaked inward on oiled hinges. Inside, racks marched into darkness, bottles glinting like sleeping bats. The air smelled of cork and tannin and something metallic beneath. Poirot's lantern swept the floor. More coal dust, a single red petal, and then blood. A thin trail, already browning, leading between the racks to the far corner. There, slumped against a crate of 1904 Chateau Margaux, sat Mrs. Agnes Crow. Or what had been Mrs. Crow. Her wrists were slashed vertically, deep and deliberate, the carpet knife still clutched in her right hand. Blood had soaked her apron, pooled beneath her, frozen into a black mirror. Her eyes were open, staring at nothing. On her lap lay a sheet of White Lodge notepaper, the message scrawled in her own neat copperplate. "I failed him. Forgive me." Lady Beatrice screamed once, a sound cut short by her own gloved hand. Daphne Vale turned away, retching. Dr. Lang knelt, felt for a pulse he knew wasn't there, then closed the dead woman's eyes with surprising tenderness. "Dead 2 hours, perhaps 3, he said. "She'd lost too much blood to be moved." Poirot's face was stone. Yet the coal dust on her shoes is fresh. She came here to die, or was brought." Japp was already examining the knife. "Her prints only, no sign of a struggle." "Observe the angle," Poirot said. "Vertical cuts require strength and resolve. The left wrist is deeper. Right-handed person would begin with the left, but the right wrist," he lifted the limp arm. "The cut hesitates, shallows, then deepens again. Someone else finished the task." Thorn, pale beneath his tan, muttered, "Good God!" Poirot's lantern moved to the crate beside the body. The top was askew. Inside, nestled in straw, lay a leather-bound ledger. He lifted it out with reverence, as though it were a reliquary. "Sir Reginald's famous black book," he said. "Mrs. Crowe guarded it with her life, and lost both." He opened it beneath the bulb. Pages of meticulous entries, dates, sums, initials. Poirot read aloud. Dr. Lang's breath hissed. Thorn swore under his breath. Daphne Vale touched the page with trembling fingers, tracing her own initials. "Illegitimate," she whispered. "He knew, all along." Lady Beatrice's voice was ice. "And the photographs?" Poirot turned the page. A small envelope was taped beside the entry. Inside, a grainy print, Beatrice and Dr. Lang, entwined on a hotel balcony, unmistakable. "Blackmail," Poirot said simply. "Sir Reginald collected sins the way others collect stamps, but one stamp was torn." He flipped to the final page. A fresh entry, ink still blue. "AC, 22 December, 1934. My son, White Lodge, all of it." Mrs. Crowe's handwriting. Beneath, Sir Reginald's spidery scrawl. "Denied. The girl gets nothing." Poirot closed the ledger. Mrs. Crowe had a son, out of wedlock, 30 years ago. Sir Reginald promised him the estate if she kept silent, then changed his mind. Japp scratched his head. "So she kills him, then herself." "Non." Poirot pointed to the blood trail. "She was alive when brought here. The coal dust ends at the door. She walked. But the knife was placed in her hand after death. See the lividity. Blood settled in the legs, not the arms. She was sitting when she died." Lang frowned. "Post-mortem staging? Précisément. The suicide note is genuine, written earlier perhaps. But the cuts were made by another. Someone wished to silence her forever." He moved along the racks. At the end, a small table, a candle stub, a glass with a finger of brandy. Poirot sniffed. The same Armagnac, and a conatine residue. She drank with her killer. On the floor beneath the table, a brass key, melted at the edges, the twin to the one in the fountain. "The study key," Japp said. "Destroyed to prevent entry." Poirot's eyes narrowed. "Or to hide what was taken. The ledger was moved after Mrs. Crowe's death. Observe, the dust is disturbed only here. Someone returned." They searched the cellar thoroughly. Behind a crate of port, a small tin box. Inside, a lock of baby hair, a tiny silver rattle, and a photograph, Mrs. Crowe, young, holding an infant. On the back, "For my darling boy, AC 1904. Daphne stared. "She was my grandmother?" "Or thought she was," Poirot said. "Sir Reginald played cruel games. The boy may be anyone, or no one." Upstairs, the house felt hollow without Mrs. Crowe's brisk step. The kitchen staff huddled in shock. Elsie wept into her apron. Poirot gathered the suspects in the library, the ledger on the table between them like a loaded gun. "Sir Reginald was poisoned between 11:42 and midnight," he began. "Mrs. Crowe brought the brandy at 9, untainted. Someone added a conatine later. The ledger gave motive to all of you." He opened it again. "Dr. Lang, euthanasia of a patient, covered up. Mr. Thorn, ruined by Sir Reginald's fraud. Mademoiselle Vale, denied her birthright. Lady Beatrice, humiliated by exposure. And Mrs. Crowe, betrayed after 30 years' loyalty." Beatrice's voice shook. You think one of us killed her too?" "I think Mrs. Crowe confronted her killer here," Poirot said, tapping the ledger. "Demanded the estate for her son. The killer agreed, brought her to the cellar, poured brandy, added poison. When she realized, she tried to leave. The killer slashed her wrists to finish it, staged the suicide." Lang's face was grey. "But the stilts, the roses, accessories," Poirot said. "The roses were Mrs. Crowe's signature. She tended them for decades. The killer used them to taunt, to confuse. The fourth rose at midnight is a promise or a threat." Thorne poured himself a whisky with shaking hands. "And the son? Who is he?" Poirot's gaze swept the room. "Someone in this house. Someone Mrs. Crowe trusted enough to drink with. Someone who knew the cellar's secrets." A log cracked in the grate. Outside, the light was failing. Snow hissed against the windows. The clock struck 5. Japp cleared his throat. "We lock the doors. No one leaves this room till midnight." Poirot nodded, "And we wait for the fourth rose." He reached into his pocket and drew out the coal-smutted ribbon from the chute. Tied to it was a tiny silver key, newly cut, gleaming. "The cellar padlock," he said, "changed this afternoon. Someone planned to return." Daphne Vale's voice was a thread. "There's a fifth rose." She pointed to the mantel. Above the fire, in a crystal vase, stood a single white rose. Impossible in winter, its petals edged with frost. None of them had seen it placed there. Poirot lifted it carefully. Beneath the vase, a folded note, the ink still wet. "The white rose is for the sun. Midnight, the conservatory. Come alone, or the ledger burns." The fire roared up suddenly, as though fed by an unseen hand. In its heart, a corner of leather curled, blackened, vanished. Poirot's face was grim. The game escalates, and the snow keeps falling. Chapter 5. The Return of Hastings. The library clock struck 6 with a hollow chime that seemed to echo inside the bones. The white rose stood in its vase like a surrender flag, frost creeping from its petals to the crystal. Poirot turned the note over in his gloved hands. The paper was heavy, White Lodge crest embossed at the top. The ink was black, almost wet, and the handwriting, deliberately slanted, was not Mrs. Crowe's. Japp barked orders. "Bolt the doors! 2 constables outside, no one in or out." But the house was already a prison. The passes were drifts 20 feet deep, the telephone line dead since dawn. They were snowbound, with a killer who had just raised the stakes. Poirot slipped the note into his pocket beside the ledger. "Midnight in the conservatory. A rendezvous. But for whom?" Lady Beatrice's voice cracked. "The son, Mrs. Crowe's son, he's here." "Or she believed he was," Poirot corrected. "The ledger promises everything to a ghost." Dr. Lang poured brandy with a doctor's precision, but his hand shook. Amber liquid slopped onto the table. "We destroy the ledger. End this. Non." Poirot's tone was steel. "The ledger is the only leverage we have. And the roses, 4 placed, 1 promised, form a pattern. We must complete it." Thorne laughed, a brittle sound. "You'll walk into a trap." "Perhaps," Poirot said, "but traps reveal the trapper." A sudden thud at the front door, 3 heavy blows, made them all start. Japp drew his revolver. "Who's there?" A familiar voice, muffled by oak and snow. "Open up, for heaven's sake! It's Hastings!" The bolts shot back. Captain Arthur Hastings stumbled in, coated in ice, cheeks raw from wind. Behind him, a farmer's sleigh stood empty, runners steaming. "Poirot! Got your wire! Dashed through the blizzard! Thought I'd never make it!" "Mon ami!" Poirot's face lit with genuine pleasure. "You arrive as the plot thickens to soup." Hastings shook snow from his cap, eyes widening at the tableau. The ledger, the white rose, the ring of suspects. Good Lord, what have I walked into? Murder most elaborate, Poirot said. Come, we examine the stilts. They adjourned to the billiard room, where Japp had laid out the evidence. Stilts, sledge, roses, keys, the bloodied sheet. Hastings listened, moustache bristling. As Poirot recounted the impossible footprints, the poisoned brandy, Mrs. Crow's staged suicide. But the stilts, Hastings said, turning them over. They've been shortened. See the fresh saw marks? Someone adjusted them after the murder. Poirot's eyes gleamed. Exactement. The original height suited Sir Reginald, 6 foot. Now they fit a smaller frame. 5'2", perhaps. He glanced at Daphne Vale, who flushed. I told you, I never— Yet the footrests are size 4, Hastings noted. Lady Beatrice's size. Beatrice's chin lifted. I haven't touched those ridiculous things. Poirot lifted the left stilt. Observe the strap. A single white hair, caught in the buckle. Not Sir Reginald's, not Mrs. Crow's. He held it to the light. Dyed, perhaps, or from a wig. Lang frowned. The village pageant. Mrs. Crow kept costumes in the attic. They climbed to the attic again. The skylight was closed now. Snow banked against it. Trunks stood open. Moth-eaten gowns spilled like entrails. In one corner, a dressmaker's dummy wearing a white wig of horsehair, one lock torn away. Hastings whistled. Someone disguised themselves as Mrs. Crow, walked the stilts in her shoes. After her death, Poirot said, the timing is crucial. Mrs. Crow died between 2 and 4 a.m. The boathouse collapsed at 3:30. The stilts were used after that to move the body a second time. Japp scratched his head. Why? To destroy evidence, Poirot said, or to retrieve something. He moved to the attic window. Below, the conservatory roof was a white rectangle. A single set of stilt prints, fresh, led from the attic skylight to the glass, then vanished. Someone returned, Poirot said, while we were in the cellar. They descended to the conservatory. The door was locked, but the glass above the bolt was smashed. Shards glittered on the flagstones. Inside, the air was colder. The furnace had died. Orchids hung limp, coated in frost. The rose trellis was bare. Every bloom had been stripped, petals scattered like blood. In the centre of the floor, a perfect circle of melted snow, revealing the flagstones. At its heart, the 5th rose, white again, but this time dipped in crimson wax still wet. Poirot lifted it. Beneath, a brass key, newly cut, and a note in Mrs. Crow's hand. The sun forgives nothing. The ledger lies. Midnight. Daphne Vale's voice was a whisper. She wrote this after she was dead? Non, Poirot said. Someone forged her hand. The ink is fresh, the paper from the library, but the key— He tested it in the conservatory door. It turned smoothly. A duplicate, made today. Lang's face was ashen. The conservatory furnace. Someone turned it off. The roses are dying. Symbolism, Poirot said. Mrs. Crow's legacy withers. But why the white roses? Hastings had been examining the workbench. He lifted a small tin. Look, rose food, but this isn't fertilizer. He sniffed. Aconitine crystals, enough to kill a dozen men. Poirot took the tin. The label was handwritten. For the white roses, AC. Mrs. Crow's writing, Japp said. She was poisoning the blooms. Or someone wished us to think so, Poirot said. The white roses were her secret. She grew them in memory of her son, born albino perhaps, or stillborn. The ledger promised him everything, then took it away. Thorne poured himself another whiskey. So the son's revenge. But who is he? Poirot's gaze swept the room. Someone who knew the attic, the stilts, the conservatory. Someone Mrs. Crow trusted enough to drink with in the cellar. He turned to Daphne. Mademoiselle, you said Sir Reginald quarrelled with Mr. Thorne after dinner. About what? Daphne hesitated. Business. Something about shares. Mr. Thorne accused him of fraud. Thorne's glass paused halfway to his lips. Lies! The old man was senile. Yet the ledger says otherwise, Poirot said. 2,000 to keep silent. You were ruined, monsieur. Desperate. Thorne slammed the glass down. I didn't kill him. Perhaps not, Poirot said, but someone did, and used you. He moved to the fountain in the conservatory centre. The water was frozen solid, a miniature of the one outside. Beneath the ice, a dark shape. Poirot chipped with his cane. A small leather pouch, sealed with wax. Inside, a lock of white hair, a tiny silver rattle, and a birth certificate. Dated 1904, Mother Agnes Crowe, father unknown. The child's name, Reginald Arthur Crowe. Hastings gasped. Sir Reginald's son? Illegitimate, Poirot said. Raised as a nephew, perhaps, or hidden. Mrs. Crowe served 30 years for this child. Sir Reginald promised the estate, then gave it to charity, or to Daphne. Daphne's eyes filled. He said I was his daughter. But the ledger lies, Poirot said. Or Sir Reginald did. The boy died in infancy. Mrs. Crowe clung to the fantasy. Someone used that. The clock struck 7. Outside, the wind rose to a howl. Japp said, We set a trap. Midnight, conservatory. I'll have men. No, Poirot said. The killer expects that. We give them what they want. He turned to Hastings. Mon ami, you will be the son. Hastings blinked. Me? You are the right height, the right build. We dress you in Mrs. Crowe's cloak, the wig. You go to the conservatory at midnight. We watch. Lang protested. It's suicide. Or justice, Poirot said. The killer wants the ledger. We give them a ghost. He opened the ledger to the final page. A fresh entry, ink still wet. RAC, 23rd December, 1934. Everything is yours. Meet me where the roses die. Poirot closed the book. The trap is baited, and the snow keeps falling. At 11:55 p.m., Hastings, cloaked, wigged, face-powdered death pale, stepped into the conservatory. The others waited in the dark, breath held. The furnace was dead. Frost glittered on the leaves. The white roses were black with cold. Midnight. A figure emerged from the shadows, small, cloaked, gloved, a woman's silhouette. She carried a lantern and a single red rose. "Mama!" Hastings whispered, voice trembling. The figure raised the lantern. Light fell on Daphne Vale's face, eyes wild, a revolver steady in her hand. "You're not my brother," she said, "but you'll do." She fired. The bullet shattered the fountain's ice. Hastings stumbled, clutched his arm. Poirot burst from the shadows, cane raised. "Enough, mademoiselle!" Daphne spun, revolver swinging. "He promised me, then gave it to a dead boy." Poirot's voice was calm. "You forged the entries. You killed Mrs. Crowe to protect your inheritance. You used the stilts, the roses, the ledger, everything." Daphne's laugh was broken. She was going to tell. She knew I poisoned the brandy. She raised the gun to her own temple. Hastings lunged, tackled her. The revolver skittered across the flagstones. Japp's men swarmed in. As they cuffed her, Daphne whispered, "The roses were for my mother. He never sent her any." Poirot picked up the red rose she had dropped. Its stem was wrapped in a scrap of Mrs. Crowe's apron, stained with coal dust and blood. "The 5th rose," he said quietly, "for betrayal." The conservatory furnace guttered. Died. Outside, the snow kept falling. Chapter 6. The Empty Sarcophagus. The conservatory was a battlefield of frost and broken glass. Daphne Vale sat on the flagstones, wrists cuffed, hair wild about her face, the red rose crushed beneath her knee. The revolver lay where it had fallen, barrel still warm. Hastings pressed a handkerchief to his upper arm. The bullet had grazed him, nothing more. Japp's men, 2 burly constables borrowed from Ambleside, stood over the scene like bookends. Poirot knelt beside the fountain. The ice had shattered into a spiderweb of cracks. Water seeped across the tiles, carrying flecks of crimson wax from the 5th rose. He lifted a shard of ice with his penknife. Beneath it, the brass key, the duplicate, glinted dully. "She planned to lock us in," he murmured. "Burn the ledger. Let the roses die with her secret." Lady Beatrice's voice was a thread. "But Mrs. Crowe, did Daphne kill her too?" "Oui," Poirot said. "Mrs. Crowe discovered the forged ledger entry. Daphne lured her to the cellar with brandy, added aconitine, then slashed the wrists post-mortem. The suicide note was written earlier. Mrs. Crowe's despair was real, but not fatal." Dr. Lang's face was grey. "And the stilts?" "Daphne practiced for weeks," Poirot said. "The attic, the hedge, the sledge. She carried Sir Reginald's body to the fountain at 3 a.m., returned on stilts to erase prints, then collapsed the boathouse to hide evidence. The roses were her signature, stolen from Mrs. Crowe's grief." Japp hauled Daphne to her feet. "You'll hang for this, girl." She laughed, a broken sound. "He promised me everything, then gave it to a ghost." They marched her to the library, locked the door with a constable outside. The clock struck 1. The house felt hollow, the snow outside a relentless shroud. Poirot gathered the others in the hall. "We are not finished," he said. "The body—" He broke off. A low groan echoed from the south lawn, followed by a sharp crack like a rifle shot. They ran to the windows. The fountain, Sir Reginald's icy tomb, had split wide open. Water gushed forth in a dark torrent, carrying with it the top hat, the red rose, and impossibly the body itself. But the body was gone. The ice was hollow, a perfect sarcophagus with no occupant. Only the coat-tails remained, frozen to the marble, and the top hat floated like a black lily on the flood. Hastings gasped. "Good Lord, he's been moved again!" Poirot's eyes blazed. Après, we examined him. The killer returned. They plunged outside, boots slipping on the ice. The water had carved a channel through the snow, revealing the lawn beneath. Footprints, small, hurried, led from the fountain to the cellar hatch. The hatch stood open, snow drifting in. Japp swore. "She did this from inside." "No," Poirot said. "An accomplice." They followed the prints. The cellar was darker now, the bulbs smashed. Their lanterns cut cones of light through the gloom. The wine racks stood sentinel. Mrs. Crowe's body had been removed to the scullery for decency. But in the centre of the floor, where the coal pile had been, lay Sir Reginald, propped against a barrel like a tailor's dummy, throat cut ear to ear, the wound crusted black. Lang recoiled. "Post-mortem! He's been dead 12 hours!" Poirot knelt. The cut was clean, made with a sharp blade, perhaps the carpet knife. Blood had pooled and frozen. On the corpse's waistcoat, a fresh cognac stain still wet. "The poison was in the second glass," Poirot said, "administered after death, to mislead. The throat was cut to destroy evidence of aconitine in the stomach." Hastings stared. "But why move him at all?" "To buy time," Poirot said. "Daphne needed us focused on the fountain. The cellar was the true scene." He searched the corpse. The pockets were empty save for a single red petal, pressed flat. Beneath the barrel, a small tin of tooth powder, lid askew. Poirot sniffed, touched a finger to the powder, tasted. "Aconitine," he said. "Slow poisoning over weeks. The brandy was the coup de grace." Japp scratched his head. "She poisoned his tooth powder." "Oui, Daphne had access. Cleaned his room, laid out his things. Sir Reginald noticed nothing until too late. Thorne's voice was hoarse. "And Mrs. Crowe?" "Discovered the tin," Poirot said. "Confronted Daphne, was silenced." They searched the cellar again. Behind a crate of port, a bundle of white roses, wilted, their stems wrapped in Mrs. Crowe's apron. A note pinned to the bundle. "For the son who never was, the roses die with me." Daphne's handwriting. Poirot's face was grim. She planned to burn them with the ledger, a pyre for her lies. Upstairs, the house was silent save for the wind. The conservatory roses were black with frost. The furnace would not relight. Poirot stood among the ruins, the wilted bouquet in his hands. "The white roses were Mrs. Crowe's," he said, "grown in secret for a child who died at birth. Sir Reginald promised her the estate in exchange for silence, then willed it to Daphne, his true daughter. Daphne forged the ledger to claim both inheritance and revenge." Beatrice's voice shook. "But the son, a fantasy," Poirot said. "Mrs. Crowe clung to it. Daphne used it." Hastings noticed something glinting in the dead fountain. He chipped away ice. A gold cufflink, Sir Reginald's, engraved R.H. "From the conservatory," Poirot said, "planted to implicate Lady Beatrice." Lung's eyes narrowed. "And the melted key?" "To delay discovery of the study. Daphne needed time to move the body." Japp said, "We confront her." They returned to the library. Daphne sat chained to a chair, face blank. Poirot laid the tooth-powder tin before her. "Explain," she smiled, "a terrible thing. He brushed his teeth every night. I added a pinch each morning. He never noticed. The brandy was for show. Mrs. Crowe brought it clean. I added the final dose in the study, watched him drink, then walked him to the fountain. He collapsed. I carried him back on the sledge, arranged him in ice. And Mrs. Crowe, she found the tin, said she'd tell. I gave her brandy, laced. She drank. I cut her wrists after, staged the suicide. The stilts? Practice. I'm small, perfect balance. The roses were easy. Mrs. Crowe taught me." Poirot's voice was soft. "And the white roses?" Daphne's eyes filled. "She grew them for her son. I burned them to kill her dream." She laughed again, hysterical. "He should have loved me." Japp hauled her away. The cell in the village would wait until the snow cleared. Poirot stood in the hall, the wilted roses in his hands. "The perfect crime," he said, "poisoned slowly, staged elaborately, all for love that never was." Hastings clapped his shoulder. "You solved it, old chap." "No," Poirot said. "The snow solved it. It kept the secrets until they rotted." Outside, the fountain's water had frozen again, a black mirror reflecting the moon. The top hat floated atop it, brim filled with snow. The house was silent. The roses were dead. Chapter 7. The Shattered Greenhouse. The conservatory lay in ruin. Orchids hung decapitated from their baskets. Ferns were shredded into green confetti. The rose trellis had been hacked to splinters. Shards of glass glittered across the flagstones like a carpet of ice. In the centre of the carnage, Giles Thorne lay on his back, a revolver beside his outstretched hand, a neat black hole in his right temple. Blood had pooled and frozen into a dark halo. The air reeked of gunpowder and crushed petals. Japp knelt, careful not to disturb the scene. "One shot, close range. Powder burns on the skin." Poirot stood motionless, cane tapping the floor in a slow, deliberate rhythm. His gaze moved from the body to the revolver, a Webley Memco 4, Thorne's own, monogrammed on the grip, to the suicide note pinned beneath the dead man's cuff. "I killed him. The shame is too much. Forgive me." The handwriting was Thorne's, sprawling, impatient. The paper was White Lodge stationery torn from the library pad. Hastings whistled low. "Looks cut and dried. He panicked after Daphne's arrest." "No," Poirot said quietly. "Observe." He crouched beside the corpse. The wound was on the left temple, the revolver in the right hand. The angle was wrong for a self-inflicted shot. Poirot lifted the dead man's left hand, limp, unburned. Then the right, powder residue on the index finger, but the palm was clean. "A right-handed man shoots himself on the left side," Poirot said. "The dominant hand holds the gun. Yet here the burns are on the left. The bullet entered there. Someone pressed the barrel to his temple and fired." Lang's voice was hoarse. "Murder, staged as suicide. Again." Poirot's eyes swept the wreckage. Every bloom had been systematically destroyed, snipped, torn, crushed. The fountain was dry, its pump smashed. On the workbench, the aconitine tin, lid pried off, crystals scattered like salt. "Someone was looking for something," Poirot said, "and found Mr. Thorne instead." He moved to the potting shed at the rear, a narrow door half hidden by ivy. The lock was new, the wood scarred by a jemmy. Inside, chaos. Seed trays overturned, tools scattered, a false panel in the wall pried open. Behind it, a narrow tunnel brick-lined sloping downward. The air was damp, earthy. "A priest hole," Hastings breathed. "Or a smuggler's run." Poirot's lantern revealed footprints in the dust, small, size 4 again. They led to a wooden ladder descending into darkness. At the bottom, the boathouse cellar now half collapsed. The tunnel emerged behind a stack of oars. Japp swore. "Secret access! Anyone could come and go." Poirot climbed down. The boathouse floor was a jumble of broken beams and snow. In the corner, a suitcase, monogrammed GT, packed with clothes, passport, and $500 in notes. A train timetable to Glasgow lay open to the 6:15 a.m. sailing. "Mr. Thorne planned to flee," Poirot said, "but someone stopped him." He searched the suitcase. Beneath the shirts, a second ledger, smaller, leather-bound, identical to the one in the library. Poirot opened it. The entries were the same, but the final page was different. DV, everything. The boy was a lie. RH. Daphne's handwriting. Beneath, in Thorne's scrawl, "I have proof. Meet me conservatory 2 a.m., or the world knows." Poirot closed the book. Blackmail within blackmail. Thorne discovered Daphne's forgery, threatened to expose her unless she paid. Hastings frowned. "But Daphne's locked up." "Oui. So who killed Thorne?" They returned to the conservatory. Poirot examined the revolver. The cylinder held 5 rounds. 1 fired. The serial number had been filed off. On the floor beside Thorne's body, a single white rose, its petals edged with frost, a thorn driven through the centre like a nail. "The 6th rose," Poirot said, "for silence." He searched Thorne's pockets. Wallet, cigarette case, a gold lighter engraved to G from B, Monte Carlo, 1933, Lady Beatrice's gift. In the breast pocket, a folded note, the ink still wet. "You should have left with the money. The roses are done." Unsigned. Beatrice's hand flew to her mouth. "I never—" Poirot's gaze was steady. "The lighter places you in Monte Carlo with Mr. Thorne. The photographs in the ledger, were they his insurance?" She sank onto a bench, face crumpling. "Reginald found them, threatened to ruin us both. Giles said he could buy them back. I gave him the money." Lang's voice was sharp. "You paid Thorne to steal the ledger." "I paid him to destroy it," Beatrice whispered. "He lied." Poirot turned to the shattered fountain. Beneath the debris, a small glass vial, empty, label peeled. He sniffed. "Aconitine solution. Enough for 1 dose." Japp bagged it. "Thorne's? Or the killer's?" Poirot said. "Administered post-mortem to confuse time of death." He moved to the tunnel entrance. The false panel had been pried with a crowbar. Found in the potting shed, Thorne's fingerprints on the handle. The tunnel walls bore fresh scratches. DV was here. Daphne's confession, Hastings said, carved after her arrest. Non, Poirot said, before. She planned to frame Thorn from the beginning. They followed the tunnel back to the boathouse. In the rubble, a woman's shoe size 4, heel snapped. Inside, a scrap of paper, damp with blood. The 7th rose blooms in the cellar. Come alone. Lang's handwriting. Poirot's eyes narrowed. Dr. Lang, you were in the cellar with Mrs. Crowe. Lang paled. I examined the body, that's all. Yet your medical bag was in the conservatory, Poirot said. The aconitine vial, half empty. You supplied Daphne. Lang's voice rose. I treated Sir Reginald for years. I'd never, yet the ledger says otherwise, Poirot said. Euthanasia, 1927. Sir Reginald owned you. Lang lunged for the tunnel. Japp tackled him. The doctor fought like a madman, but the constables pinned him. Poirot stood over him. You helped Daphne poison the tooth powder. You forged the suicide notes. You killed Thorn when he threatened to talk. Lang spat blood. He was greedy, wanted half the estate. Beatrice sobbed. You used me. Lang's laugh was bitter. You were easy. The photographs were Thorn's idea. Poirot turned to the Eugene conservatory. The roses were gone, but the soil beds were disturbed. He dug with his cane. Beneath the surface, a metal box locked. Japp pried it open. Inside, the original ledger, unforged. The final entry. To my daughter Daphne Vale. Everything. The boy was stillborn. Forgive me. R.H. Poirot closed the box. The truth. Daphne destroyed it, forged her own version. Thorn found the original. Lang killed him to protect her. Japp cuffed Lang. 2 murderers, 1 mastermind. Poirot shook his head. 3, Mrs. Crowe knew. She wrote the 7th rose. He led them to the cellar. The coal pile had been cleared. Beneath, a wooden crate. Inside, Mrs. Crowe's body, wrapped in her own apron, a white rose on her breast. Her throat was cut, post-mortem. A note pinned to the fabric. The 7th rose is for the mother. I kept my promise. A.C. Daphne's handwriting. Poirot's voice was soft. She killed Mrs. Crowe to silence her. Lang staged Thorn. The roses were their language. The clock struck 4. Dawn was a grey rumour beyond the snow. Hastings said, It's over. No, Poirot said. The 8th rose is missing. He opened the metal box again. Beneath the ledger, a single red petal pressed flat. On it, in blood, the game ends where it began. The fountain, midnight. Poirot's face was grim. They planned one last act, and the snow keeps falling. Chapter 8. The Conspiracy of 5. The library fire had burned low, a sullen red eye in the grate. The 8 of them, Poirot, Hastings, Japp, 2 constables, Lady Beatrice, Dr. Lang, and the cuffed Daphne Vale, stood in a circle around the metal box. The original ledger lay open on the table, its final page a confession and a curse. The red petal, still damp with blood, rested beside it like a fallen leaf. Poirot's voice cut the silence. You all acted. A symphony of murder, each with your instrument, each believing you played alone. He lifted the ledger. Sir Reginald Haverford was poisoned slowly, aconitine in the tooth powder, administered by Mademoiselle Vale over weeks. The brandy in the study was the finale, poured by Lady Beatrice at 11:42. Dr. Lang supplied the aconitine and forged the suicide notes. Mr. Thorn carried the body on stilts and sledge, erased the footprints. Mrs. Crowe tended the roses, cut the stems, placed the 3rd in the fountain before the ice formed. A perfect quintet. Lang laughed, a cracked sound. Absurd. We barely spoke. Yet you met, Poirot said. In the conservatory, 1:17 a.m., the hothouse thermometer records a temperature spike from 5 visitors. The stilts were shortened for Daphne. The roses were Mrs. Crow's signature. Thorn provided the tunnel key. Lang the poison, Beatrice the brandy. You planned it together, then turned on each other when the ledger threatened exposure. Daphne's eyes were wild. "He promised me everything." "No," Poirot said. "He promised Mrs. Crow. You forged the will. She discovered it. You killed her in the cellar, staged the suicide. Lang helped, slashed the wrists post-mortem, planted the note. Thorn found the original ledger, blackmailed you both. Lang killed him in the conservatory, staged another suicide. The roses were your messages, love, betrayal, silence, revenge," Beatrice whispered. "I only wanted the photographs destroyed." "You gave Thorn the money," Poirot said. "He took it and kept the pictures. Lang killed him for greed. You all believed you acted alone, but the roses betray you." He opened the metal box again. Beneath the ledger, 5 white roses, pressed flat, each labelled in Mrs. Crow's hand. For Beatrice, the brandy. For Felix, the poison. For Giles, the stilts. For Daphne, the tooth powder. For Agnes, the roses. Hastings stared. Mrs. Crow knew. "She suspected," Poirot said. "She wrote the notes before her death, hid them in the box. Daphne found them, used them to frame the others." Japp's voice was grim. 5 murderers, 1 mastermind." "Daphne," Poirot said. "She orchestrated it. Mrs. Crow was her grandmother, illegitimate, like Daphne. Sir Reginald promised the estate to the boy who never lived. Daphne forged the ledger to claim it. When Mrs. Crow confronted her, Daphne killed her. The others were tools." Lang lunged at Daphne, but the constables held him. "You little—" Daphne smiled, serene. "He should have loved me." Poirot turned to the fireplace. The flames had died to embers, but something glinted in the ashes, a brass key, half melted, the conservatory duplicate. He raked it out with the poker. "The final clue," he said. "Daphne planned to burn the ledger, lock the conservatory, let the roses die with her secret. But Mrs. Crow hid the original. Thorn found it. Lang killed him. The conspiracy unraveled." Beatrice sobbed. "I didn't know about the poison." "You poured the brandy," Poirot said. "You knew." Lang spat. "She was greedy, wanted the estate free of scandal." Thorn's body had been removed to the scullery, but his suitcase remained. Poirot opened it. Beneath the clothes, the Monte Carlo photographs, Beatrice and Lang entwined. On the back, insurance, GT. "Thorn's leverage," Poirot said. "He planned to flee with the money and the pictures. Lang stopped him." Japp cuffed Lang tighter. "You'll all hang." Poirot shook his head. "Justice is not so simple. Mrs. Crow acted from love. Her roses were a memorial. Beatrice from fear. Lang from desperation. Thorn from greed. Daphne from rage. Only one struck the fatal blow." He turned to Daphne. "You visited Sir Reginald at 11:42. The clock stopped when you smashed it in rage. He told you the truth. You were to inherit nothing. You added the second dose, aconitine, in his tooth powder tin. He walked to the fountain under his own power, collapsed. You carried him back on the sledge, arranged him in ice. Mrs. Crow saw you. You killed her to silence her." Daphne lunged for the window, but Hastings tackled her. She fought like a wildcat, nails raking his cheek. The constables pinned her. Poirot picked up the red petal from the floor. "The 8th rose, for the daughter who was never enough." He opened the ledger to the final page. Beneath Sir Reginald's confession, a fresh line in Daphne's hand. The roses were for Mother. He never sent her any. The fire crackled. Outside, the snow had stopped. The sky was a hard, clear grey. The fountain stood empty, its water frozen into a black mirror. Japp said, "We take them to Ambleside when the pass is clear." Poirot nodded, but first the 9th rose. He led them to the conservatory. The roses were gone, but the soil beds were disturbed. He dug with his cane. Beneath the surface, a small tin box locked. Japp pried it open. Inside, a single white rose pressed between glass plates, its petals edged with gold. A note in Mrs. Crow's hand. "For the child who lived, the truth is in the fountain." Poirot's face was grim. Mrs. Crow's final message. She knew Daphne was Sir Reginald's daughter. She hid the proof. They returned to the fountain. The ice had thawed. Water lapped at the marble. Poirot chipped away the last layer. Beneath, a small oilskin packet. Inside, a birth certificate, Daphne Vale, Father Reginald Haverford, Mother Eliza Vale, typist. Dated 1910. Hastings stared. She was his daughter. "Oui," Poirot said, but he denied her. Mrs. Crow raised her in secret, tended the roses as a memorial to the love that never was. Daphne killed to claim what was hers. Daphne's voice was a whisper. "He should have loved me." Poirot closed the packet. "Love is not inherited, nor is forgiveness. The constables led them away, Daphne, Lang, Beatrice. The house was silent, the roses dead. Hastings said, 'It's over.'" Poirot stood by the fountain, the white rose in his hand. "No, the 10th rose is missing." He opened his pocket. The thorn that had pricked him earlier, now wrapped in a scrap of Daphne's stationery, on it, in blood. "The final rose is for you, little detective. The game was never over." Poirot's eyes narrowed. She planned one last act. He turned to the conservatory. The furnace was dead, but the soil beds were warm. He dug again. Beneath the surface, a small glass vial, filled with clear liquid. A label in Daphne's hand. "For Poirot, aconitine. Drink to the truth." Hastings gasped. "She meant to poison you." "No," Poirot said. "A test. She knew I would find it. The game was to see if I understood." He poured the vial into the soil. The white rose withered, petals black. "The conspiracy is ended," he said, "but the roses remember." The snow began again, soft and relentless. White Lodge stood silent, its secrets buried beneath the drifts. Chapter 9. The Tooth Powder Treachery. The vial lay in the soil like a spent bullet, its contents seeping into the roots of the dead roses. Poirot stared at it for a long moment, then crushed the glass beneath his heel. The conservatory was a mausoleum. Frost on the glass, petals black on the flagstones, the air thick with the scent of decay. The furnace had been cold for hours. The hothouse jungle had surrendered to winter. Hastings shivered. "She wanted you to drink it. A final taunt." "No," Poirot said softly. "A confession. The game was always about truth. She left the poison for me to find. Proof that I understood." Japp kicked at the soil. "Understood what? That she's a monster?" "That she was a child denied," Poirot said. "Sir Reginald promised love, gave shame. Mrs. Crow promised inheritance, gave silence. Daphne took both with poison." He lifted the tin of tooth powder from his pocket, the one found in the cellar beside Sir Reginald's body. The lid was dented, the powder clumped with moisture. He opened it carefully. The top layer was minty white. Beneath, a thin line of grey crystals. "Aconitine," he said, "added daily for weeks. Sir Reginald brushed his teeth at 10 each night. Daphne laid out his things. She had access. A pinch each morning. He never noticed the bitterness. The mint masked it." Lang, cuffed between constables, laughed bitterly. "Clever little bitch. I supplied the crystals, but she did the work." Beatrice's voice was a whisper. "How long?" "Since November," Poirot said. "The ledger records Daphne's first visit to Dr. Lang. Toothache." He gave her the tin. She replaced it weekly. Sir Reginald's heart weakened. He blamed age. The brandy on the final night was theatre. Mrs. Crowe brought it clean at 9. Daphne added the lethal dose in the study at 11:42, watched him drink, walked him to the fountain. He collapsed. She carried him back on the sledge, arranged him in ice at 3 a.m. He turned to Daphne. She sat on the bench, wrists bound, face calm as a Madonna. "You used the stilts twice," Poirot continued. "First to the fountain, then to the cellar after we examined the body. You moved him to destroy evidence of the tooth powder in his stomach. Lang cut the throat post-mortem to confuse the inquest." Daphne's smile was serene. "He told me I was nothing, a typist's bastard. I made him nothing." Poirot opened the original ledger. But Mrs. Crowe knew the truth. She hid this, the real will. You found it, forged your own version, burned the original. When she confronted you, you killed her. Daphne's eyes filled. She was going to tell, said I was greedy. I gave her brandy, laced. She drank, I cut her wrists after, staged the suicide. And Thorne? Greedy, she spat. Found the real ledger in the tunnel. Wanted half the estate. Lang killed him for me. Lang lunged again, but the constables held him. She promised me the photographs. I burned them after Thorne died. Beatrice sobbed. You used us all? Poirot's voice was gentle. You poured the brandy, madame. You knew it was poisoned. You acted from fear. Dr. Lang from desperation. Mrs. Crowe from love. Thorne from greed. Daphne from rage. Only one struck the fatal blow. He turned to the fountain. The ice had thawed completely. Water lapped at the marble. He reached into the basin. Beneath the nymph's hand, a small tin box identical to the one in the soil. He pried it open. Inside, a lock of baby hair, white as snow, and a photograph, Mrs. Crowe, young, holding an infant. On the back, for my darling boy, he lived, AC 1904. Hastings stared. The son lived? Oui, Poirot said. Mrs. Crowe hid him. Sir Reginald denied him. Daphne was his sister, half-sister. Mrs. Crowe raised her in secret, tended the white roses as a memorial to the brother who was taken away. Daphne's voice was a thread. She told me he died, lied to protect me. Poirot closed the box. She protected you both. Sir Reginald sent the boy to an orphanage, paid for silence. Mrs. Crowe served 30 years for a promise that was never kept. You killed her to claim what was his. He opened the tooth powder tin again. Beneath the aconitine, a small key, brass, newly cut. The cellar padlock, Japp said, changed after Mrs. Crowe's death. Daphne planned to return, Poirot said. Burn the ledger, lock the cellar, let the roses die with her secret. But Mrs. Crowe hid the truth. They returned to the cellar. The coal pile had been cleared. Beneath, a wooden crate. Inside, Mrs. Crowe's apron folded neatly, a white rose pinned to the fabric. Beneath, a second birth certificate. Reginald Arthur Crowe, born 1904, mother Agnes Crowe, father Reginald Haverford. The brother, Hastings breathed. Where is he? Gone, Poirot said. Mrs. Crowe sent him away years ago. The roses were her only connection. Daphne killed her to bury the past. Daphne's laugh was broken. He should have loved us both. Poirot stood over her. You used the stilts, the sledge, the tunnel. You forged the ledger, planted the roses, staged the suicides. Lang helped. Beatrice poured. Thorne carried. Mrs. Crowe cut the stems. You all killed him, but you struck the blow. He opened the original ledger to the final page. Beneath Sir Reginald's confession, a fresh line in Mrs. Crowe's hand. The tooth powder was for the daughter. The roses for the son, forgive me. Daphne's eyes widened. She knew. Oui, Poirot said. She wrote this before you killed her. Hid it in the crate. You found it, used it to frame the others. Japp cuffed her tighter. You'll hang, girl. Daphne's smile was serene. "The roses will remember." They led her away. Lang and Beatrice followed, faces blank. The house was silent, the snow outside a relentless shroud. Poirot stood in the conservatory, the white rose in his hand. The tooth powder was the perfect murder, slow, intimate, invisible. The brandy was the curtain, the roses were the signature. Hastings clapped his shoulder. "You solved it, old chap." "No," Poirot said. "The roses solved it. They bloomed for love, withered for betrayal." He opened his pocket. The thorn that had pricked him earlier, now wrapped in a scrap of Daphne's stationery. On it, in blood, "The final rose is for you, little detective. The game was never over." Poirot crushed the thorn in his fist. She planned one last act. He turned to the fountain. The water had frozen again. A black mirror. Beneath the ice, a single red rose, thornless, floating like a drowning star. "The 9th rose," he said, "for the truth." He chipped away the ice. Beneath, a small envelope sealed with wax. Inside, a lock of hair, Daphne's, and a note in her hand. "The tooth powder was for father, the roses for mother, the thorn for you. You understood." Poirot closed the envelope. "She left this before her arrest. The game was to see if I would find it." He poured the tooth powder into the soil. The white rose withered, petals black. "The conspiracy is ended," he said, "but the roses remember." The snow began again, soft and relentless. White Lodge stood silent, its secrets buried beneath the drifts. Chapter 10. The silence of the White Lodge snow fell again soft as ash, erasing the last footprints from the terrace. White Lodge stood in its shroud, windows blind with frost, the fountain a black mirror beneath the drifts. The conservatory was a tomb of shattered glass and dead roses, the cellar a vault of silence. The house had swallowed its secrets, and now it slept. Poirot stood alone by the fountain, the 9th rose in his gloved hand. Its petals were black, the stem snapped clean. He turned it over, reading the note again. Daphne's final confession, sealed in wax and ice. The thorn had pricked him once. Now it lay in his pocket, wrapped in her stationery, a tiny wound that refused to close. Hastings joined him, breath fogging. "The sleighs are ready. Japs taking them to Ambleside at dawn. The passes are clear enough." Poirot nodded. "And the roses?" "Burned. Every stem, every petal. The soil's frozen solid. Nothing will grow there again." They walked the lawn. The fountain's water had frozen into a perfect lens. Beneath it, the oilskin packet with Daphne's birth certificate lay like a relic. Poirot chipped away the ice, lifted it free. The paper was crisp, the ink faded but legible. Daphne Eliza Vale, Father Reginald Haverford, Mother Eliza Vale, deceased 1918. "She was his daughter," Hastings said, "all along." "Oui," Poirot said, "but never his heir. Sir Reginald sent the boy, Reginald Arthur, to an orphanage in 1905, paid Mrs. Crowe to keep silent, promised her the estate when he died, then changed his mind, left everything to charity, with a codicil for Daphne if she proved her blood. She forged the will to claim it outright." Hastings kicked at the snow. "And Mrs. Crowe?" "Loved them both, raised Daphne in secret, tended the white roses for the son she lost. When Daphne poisoned Sir Reginald, Mrs. Crowe suspected, confronted her in the cellar. Daphne killed her to protect the lie." They entered the house. The hall was stripped bare, portraits gone, furniture draped in dust sheets. Japp stood by the door, ledger in hand. "The originals with the crown," he said. "Daphne's forgery burned with the roses. Lang's confessed to the aconitine, the staged suicides. Beatrice to the brandy. They'll hang together." Poirot's eyes were distant. "And the 10th rose?" Japp frowned. There was no 10th. Poirot opened his hand. The thorn, the stationery, the drop of his own blood. She promised a final act. The game was never over. He led them to the study. The desk was empty, the blotter gone, but the fireplace held fresh ashes. Poirot raked them carefully. Beneath, a single red petal, pressed flat, and a scrap of paper. Mrs. Crow's hand, the ink faded. The 10th rose is for the house. It remembers. Hastings stared. She wrote this before she died. We, Poirot said, hid it in the chimney. Daphne found it, used it to taunt us. But the house remembers everything. They climbed to the attic. The skylight was open, snow had drifted across the boards. The dressmaker's dummy stood in its moth-eaten gown, the white wig intact. On the dummy's breast, a single white rose, pressed between glass plates, its petals edged with gold. The memorial, Poirot said, Mrs. Crow's final gift, for the son who lived, the daughter who died inside. He lifted the rose. Beneath, a small tin box, locked. Japp pried it open. Inside, a lock of white baby hair, a silver rattle, and a photograph, Mrs. Crow, young, holding 2 infants. On the back, Reginald and Daphne, my darlings, AC 1904. Hastings's voice was soft. Twins. Oui, Poirot said. Sir Reginald took the boy, left the girl. Mrs. Crow raised Daphne in secret, told her the brother died. The white roses were for him, the red for her. Daphne killed to claim what was his. They descended to the conservatory. The soil beds were frozen hard, but Poirot dug with his cane. Beneath the surface, a small glass vial, empty, and a note in Daphne's hand. The 10th rose is silence. The house keeps it. Poirot crushed the vial. She planned to poison the well, literal and figurative. Let the house die with her secret. Japp said, We'll tear it apart, find every scrap. Non, Poirot said. The house has spoken. Let it sleep. They left White Lodge at dawn. The sleighs cut fresh tracks through the snow, the prisoners bundled in blankets. Daphne sat between constables, face calm, eyes on, the horizon. Lung stared at his hands. Beatrice wept silently. Poirot rode with Hastings. The fells rose around them, white and endless. The house shrank behind, a dark shape against the sky. Hastings said, You think it's over? Poirot opened his hand. The 10th rose, white, pressed perfect, lay in his palm. He had taken it from the dummy. Beneath the glass, a final note in Mrs. Crow's hand. The silence is for the children. Forgive them. Poirot closed his fist. It is over. The roses are silent. They reached Ambleside by noon. The prisoners were taken to the cells. The ledger was filed. The inquest set for spring. Poirot and Hastings took rooms at the inn. That night, Poirot stood by the window, the white rose in his hand. The snow had stopped. The moon hung full and cold. Hastings joined him. You kept it? Oui, Poirot said. A reminder. The perfect crime is not impossible footsteps, but impossible forgiveness. He opened the window. The rose caught the moonlight, then fell, petals scattering like snow. The wind carried them into the dark. White Lodge stood empty, its secrets buried beneath the drifts. The fountain froze solid. The conservatory collapsed under its own weight. The roses were gone, but the house remembered. Years later, travellers would speak of a light in the attic window, a woman in white tending flowers that bloomed in winter. Children would find red petals in the snow, thornless, perfect. The silence of the White Lodge endured. Poirot never returned. But in his memoirs he wrote, The snow covers all, but the roses remember. And so do I. The case was closed. The game was over.